He purchased the most beautiful Apache slave woman. Wild West romance. The sun hung low over the Montana plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Caleb Ryder rode slowly across the dusty land, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. For 20 years, this had been his life. Endless stretches of prairie, a ranch mostly tended by robotic hands, and the quiet company of his own thoughts. He had chosen isolation long ago, after the loss of family and the heartbreak of love gone wrong. The world had moved on without him, and he had moved on without it. His horse, a sturdy black stallion named Orion, moved steadily beneath him, as though it understood the rhythm of his life. Caleb had never been one for chatter, and Orion was the kind of companion who didn't ask questions. The ranch sprawled behind him, a combination of old wooden barns and high-tech energy fences that hummed faintly in the wind. Drones hovered lazily overhead, scanning the land for any intruders or problems with the robotic cattle. Caleb checked on them routinely, ensuring the systems were working, the animals were fed, and the fences held firm. Life was simple. Life was predictable. And for Caleb, that was enough, or at least it had been. As he neared the northern edge of the property, Caleb raised his hand, signaling Orion to stop. His drone hovered closer, scanning the horizon. A faint shimmer caught his eye. At first he thought it was heat rising from the dry earth, but then he saw it move. A small hover wagon, partially stuck in the mud, its lights flickering weakly. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Hover wagons weren't uncommon in these parts, but most travelers avoided the northern stretch of the prairie. Something about this one felt different. Without thinking, he guided Orion toward it, the horse moving swiftly over the uneven terrain. By the time he reached the wagon, he could see the figure inside. A woman no older than 30, with dark hair tangled from the wind and dirt on her face. Her eyes were sharp, alert, and filled with determination. But there was also fear there. Fear that matched the urgency of her situation. "Need a hand?" Caleb asked, his voice low but steady. The woman looked up, startled, then nodded. "Yes, please. I can't get it moving." Caleb dismounted, landing softly in the mud. He inspected the wagon quickly. Its hover engines were sputtering, circuits exposed, and the control panel flickering erratically. He wasn't a mechanic by profession, but he had spent enough years maintaining his own equipment to know what to do. "Step back," he said. I'll have it running in a bit." The woman stepped aside, watching him carefully. Caleb's hands worked efficiently, checking wires, stabilizing the energy core, and bypassing a few damaged circuits. The storm clouds were gathering above, dark and heavy, threatening rain. Every second counted. Finally, the engines hummed steadily. The lights on the control panel glowed a steady green. Caleb wiped his hands on his pants and nodded. "There. Good as new. You'll want to head back before the storm hits." The woman exhaled, relief washing over her features. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would be out here for miles." "Caleb Ryder," he said, extending a hand. "Wrench up that way." He pointed vaguely toward the cluster of barns and energy fences behind him. "I'm Lyra," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. "I'm on a mission, of sorts, but I got sidetracked." Caleb didn't ask what kind of mission. Not yet. He had learned long ago that strangers brought more trouble than comfort, and yet there was something about Lyra that didn't feel like trouble. Something in her calm confidence, mixed with the vulnerability of being stranded in the middle of nowhere. The first drops of rain fell, cold and sharp. Lyra hesitated, glancing at the darkening sky. "I can't make it far in this weather," she admitted. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had spent 2 decades avoiding attachments, but the wilderness was unforgiving. He couldn't just leave her here. "Come with me," he said. "You could stay the night, just until the storm passes." She nodded, a small smile breaking through her tense expression. "Thank you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Caleb kept his thoughts to himself, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. Lyra sat behind him on Orion, holding on carefully, her gadgets tucked safely in a satchel. There was a strange comfort in her silence, as if the two of them were in some unspoken agreement to take things slow. At the ranch, Caleb led her inside the main barn, which had been converted into a simple living space. A small fire crackled in the corner, and a cot had been set up for guests, rare as they were. Lyra's eyes widened slightly at the blend of rustic and technological elements. The barn smelled of hay, oil, and the faint ozone scent from the energy shields Caleb had installed. "You don't get many visitors," Lyra observed quietly. "Not usually," Caleb admitted. "And most of the time that's fine with me. They worked together to settle her in, drying her clothes and repairing a small tear in her jacket with supplies Caleb had kept for emergencies. The storm outside raged, rain lashing against the barn walls, wind howling through the cracks. Inside, the fire warmed the space, and the tension of the outside world seemed to fade. Over a simple meal of bread and canned stew, they spoke cautiously. Caleb learned that Lyra had been traveling across the frontier for weeks, seeking information and technology for a distant colony in trouble. She didn't reveal too much, keeping her mission vague, but there was an intelligence and resolve in her that Caleb respected. As the night deepened, Lyra sat by the fire, examining a small device that emitted faint holographic projections. Caleb watched her, feeling something stir that he hadn't felt in years, a mix of curiosity and something warmer, more human. He turned away quickly, pretending to check on the barn's energy systems. 20 years alone had made him wary of companionship, but there was no denying that her presence was different. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but inside the barn, a quiet rhythm settled between them. The crackling fire, the soft hum of the energy systems, and the occasional sound of Orion shifting in his stall created a sense of safety. For the first time in decades, Caleb felt a flicker of connection. Eventually, Lyra set her device aside and looked at Caleb. "I know you've been alone a long time," she said softly. "You don't have to hide it from me." Caleb shrugged. "I don't hide much. I've learned to keep my distance. Life teaches you lessons, sometimes too harshly." "I understand," she replied. "But not every connection leads to pain. Sometimes it leads to help, and maybe something better." He glanced at her, meeting her gaze. There was a quiet sincerity in her eyes, a calm strength that was both intriguing and comforting. Caleb didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in 20 years he didn't feel like he had to face it alone. The storm began to ease, rain tapering off into a gentle drizzle. Outside, the plains glistened under the moonlight, puddles reflecting the stars above. Caleb and Lyra moved closer to the fire, their conversation drifting to lighter topics, stories of the frontier, old legends, and the rare animals that still roamed these lands. For a brief moment, the past 20 years of solitude seemed like a distant memory. Eventually, Lyra retired to the cot, and Caleb took a position near the fire, his mind restless but strangely calm. He knew that her presence would change things. Perhaps not immediately, but slowly, subtly. And despite the caution he felt, he allowed himself to hope. Hope, he realized, was something he hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the wind whispered through the plains, carrying the promise of new beginnings. And inside the small barn, two strangers shared a quiet night, unaware of the adventures and challenges that awaited them. One thing was certain: Caleb Ryder's life of solitude was about to be disrupted in ways he could never have anticipated. For 20 years, he had lived alone. But tonight, the frontier had reminded him that even the most rugged cowboy could find unexpected company, and maybe, just maybe, a chance at something more. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the Montana plains in soft shades of gold and pink. Caleb Ryder stepped outside the barn, the crisp air filling his lungs. The storm from last night had left the prairie sparkling, dew glistening on the grass, and puddles reflecting the mountains in the distance. Orion, his black stallion, nickered softly, pawing at the ground. Lyra was already up, standing by the energy fence with a small device in her hands. Caleb watched her for a moment. She moved with purpose, adjusting the settings on the fence's sensors, her fingers precise and confident. Even in this remote frontier, with only him and a few drones for company, she seemed completely at ease. "You know your way around this tech," Caleb said, approaching her. Lyra looked up and smiled faintly. "I've had to. Traveling across the frontier isn't easy, and I've learned to make the most of what I find." Caleb nodded. He appreciated her honesty. Most people would have panicked or tried to hide from him when stranded in the northern plains, but Lyra was different. Calm. Practical. And, despite the circumstances, surprisingly cheerful. They spent the morning working together around the ranch. Caleb showed her how to check the robotic cattle and repair minor malfunctions. Lyra, in turn, demonstrated how her gadgets could improve the efficiency of his systems: small drones that could scan for weak spots in the fence, a sensor to monitor soil quality, and a tiny holographic map that projected the ranch's entire perimeter in real time. Caleb had always trusted his own skills, but seeing technology in action from someone else's hands was enlightening. "You could have been a rancher too," he said as they fixed a minor malfunction in one of the cattle bots. Lyra laughed softly. "Maybe." But I've spent most of my life on the move. Settling down isn't really my style, until now maybe. Caleb looked at her but didn't comment. For 20 years, he had told himself the same thing. Attachments only bring trouble. But there was something in Lyra's presence that made him consider otherwise. By midday, the sky had cleared, and the plains stretched endlessly before them, golden and peaceful. They took a break, sitting on a fallen log near the edge of the property. Caleb offered Lyra a flask of water, which she accepted gratefully. For a few minutes they sat in silence, watching Orion graze nearby. "You've lived here a long time," Lyra said eventually. 20 years alone, right? Caleb nodded. "I've learned to enjoy the quiet. The land keeps you company if you let it. No lies, no people getting in your way, just you, your work, and the prairie." "But don't you get lonely?" she asked, tilting her head. "Even just a little?" Caleb hesitated. No one had asked him that in years. Loneliness wasn't something he enjoyed admitting, even to himself. But looking at Lyra, with her honest eyes and open expression, he felt a flicker of trust. "Sometimes," he said finally. "But mostly, I'm used to it." Lyra smiled softly. "I think I understand. Life can teach you lessons you don't want, and people, sometimes they hurt you more than anything else. But every now and then, someone shows up who makes it worth trying again." Caleb felt the words settle in his chest. They were simple, yet heavy with truth. He had never expected to hear such words in the middle of his isolated prairie, but Lyra had a way of speaking that made him pause. The rest of the day passed quickly. They repaired fences, tended to the robotic cattle, and even managed to reroute some of the energy flow to power a backup barn light system. Caleb found himself genuinely enjoying her company, the ease of working alongside someone who understood both the land and the tools. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie, Caleb noticed something unsettling. A faint shimmer in the distance. Drones, moving in formation. Not his, not from the ranch. Something was approaching. "Caleb," Lyra said, her voice low and tense, "we're not alone out here." He squinted, studying the shimmer. "I see them. Stay close." Caleb's heart quickened, but not from fear. After years of solitude, he had faced storms, wild animals, and mechanical failures, but this was different. This was deliberate. Someone, or something, was watching. The drones circled, scanning. Caleb instinctively guided Orion behind a ridge, shielding both himself and Lyra. The two of them crouched low, barely breathing. Caleb's hand hovered over his holstered sidearm while Lyra prepared a small energy device, its purpose unclear but seemingly defensive. "They're not just passing by," Lyra whispered. "They're tracking me." Caleb's mind raced. Lyra had mentioned a mission yesterday, something important. He hadn't pressed, not wanting to intrude. But now it was clear that whatever she was involved in had drawn attention and danger to his doorstep. "We'll deal with them," Caleb said firmly. "But first we need to get back to the ranch. There's no cover out here." They moved carefully, Orion responding to Caleb's subtle signals. The drones followed, their faint hums growing louder with each step. By the time they reached the barn, Caleb had already activated the energy shields, creating a protective dome that flickered with blue light. The drones hovered at the edge of the shield, unable to breach it. Lyra exhaled, relief evident on her face. "You really are good at this," she said. "More than just ranch work," Caleb grunted. "Experience, and a lot of time alone to think." They spent the evening reinforcing defenses, combining Caleb's frontier skills with Lyra's technology. Tripwires, energy barriers, and early warning sensors were put in place. The barn, once a simple structure, now resembled a small fortress. As they worked, conversation drifted naturally. Lyra shared stories of her travels across the frontier, encounters with rogue traders, near misses with storms, and clever ways she had used technology to survive. Caleb, in turn, shared tales of life on the ranch, repairing broken fences during blizzards, keeping the robotic cattle safe from predators, and the small joys of solitude. For the first time in decades, Caleb laughed freely. Lyra's stories were funny, clever, and daring. He realized he had forgotten what it was like to share a moment without the weight of silence pressing down on him. Night fell, the prairie bathed in the soft light of the moon. Stars sparkled above, and the barn glowed faintly with the blue shimmer of the energy shield. Caleb and Lyra stood outside for a moment, surveying the land. The drones were gone, at least for now, but the memory of their presence lingered. "You're not afraid," Lyra said softly, studying him. "Even after all these years alone, facing danger doesn't scare you." Caleb shook his head. "You get used to it," The world throws storms at you, sometimes literal, sometimes other kinds. You survive, or you don't. Lyra looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. And yet you let me stay, even knowing the danger could follow. That's brave. He shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe I'm tired of being alone. The words surprised even him. He had never admitted that to anyone, not even to himself. But there was something about Lyra, her calm presence, her quiet strength, that made him consider the possibility of companionship again. They retreated to the barn, setting up near the fire. The warmth of the flames was comforting, a small barrier against the cold night and the uncertainties outside. Lyra tinkered with one of her devices, while Caleb checked the systems one last time. Silence settled between them, but it was no longer heavy or uncomfortable. It was a shared quiet, a moment of trust forming between two people from very different worlds. "Thank you, Caleb," Lyra said finally, her voice soft. "For letting me stay. For trusting me." Caleb looked at her, meeting her gaze. There was honesty in her eyes, a sincerity that went beyond words. He nodded. "The frontier isn't done with us, but for tonight, it's enough." As the fire crackled and the stars shone above, Caleb realized that the unexpected companion beside him had changed something inside him. Life had been predictable for 20 years, but now, with Lyra here, the prairie felt different, alive in a way it hadn't for decades. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grasses, carrying hints of storms and distant threats. Inside the barn, two unlikely companions shared a quiet night, building trust, laughter, and the fragile beginnings of friendship, maybe even something more. The frontier was unpredictable, but for Caleb Ryder, unpredictability no longer felt like a threat. It felt like possibility. And possibility, after 20 years alone, was a powerful thing. The next morning, the Montana plains glimmered under a clear sky, the aftermath of the storm leaving puddles and sparkling dew behind. Caleb Ryder moved across the ranch, checking the fences and robotic cattle. Orion followed steadily, its hooves tapping softly against the wet earth. Lyra trailed beside him, her satchel full of devices, scanning the horizon as if danger could appear from the blue sky itself. "You're early today," Lyra said, adjusting one of her sensor drones. Caleb grunted. "Always early. Makes it easier to spot trouble before it finds me." Lyra smiled faintly, impressed. "And you've been doing this alone for 20 years? Caleb's lips tightened. "Mostly. Solitude teaches you a lot about patience and about what really matters." She glanced at him thoughtfully, as if considering the weight behind his words. "I think I understand. Life can be harsh out here, and the people who survive are the ones who adapt." Caleb nodded but didn't speak further. He had seen enough of life's harshness to know that words sometimes carried more weight than silence could hold. By mid-morning, the calm of the ranch was broken by a faint hum in the distance. Caleb froze, his hand going instinctively to his holstered sidearm. Lyra stiffened as well, her device scanning the air. The hum grew louder, metallic and precise, a fleet of drones moving in formation accompanied by a larger hovercraft. "They're back," Lyra whispered, a tinge of fear in her voice. "They're tracking me, Caleb." "I told you it wouldn't be long." Caleb's mind raced. He had hoped for a quiet day, maybe even to enjoy the rare company of another human being. But the frontier didn't allow for wishes. It demanded action. "Stay calm," he said, though his own pulse quickened. "Follow my lead." He guided Orion and Lyra behind a low ridge, using the natural rise in the terrain as cover. The hovercraft and drones circled, scanning the area, their sensors trained on the ranch. Caleb assessed quickly. They were well-equipped, precise, and relentless. This wasn't a random patrol, it was a targeted attack. "They have exosuits," Lyra said quietly. "Armed, mobile, and very fast. We'll need more than speed to get out of this." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Then we make a stand. We can't let them breach the ranch." "Not here." Together they moved swiftly, setting up improvised defenses around the barn. Caleb combined frontier ingenuity with Lyra's technology. Energy shields reinforced the barn's walls, tripwires were laid along likely approaches, and a few cleverly disguised traps were set in the surrounding mudflats. Lyra's devices hummed and projected holographic maps tracking every movement of the incoming drones. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the prairie. Caleb and Lyra crouched near the barn, observing the advancing threat, The drones moved with mechanical precision, scanning for weak points, while the hovercraft hovered menacingly at the perimeter. "They're testing us," Caleb muttered. "Looking for a mistake. Or a weakness," Lyra added. "We have to be smarter than them, faster than them, and we have to trust each other." Caleb glanced at her. Trust wasn't something he had given freely in decades, but with the drones circling and danger pressing in, he had no choice. They had to work as one. The first drone approached the energy shield. It hovered, scanning, then fired a low-energy pulse that fizzled harmlessly against the barrier. Caleb activated a reflective field, sending a feedback pulse that disrupted the drone's sensors temporarily. Lyra's quick adjustments amplified the effect, buying them precious seconds. "Nice work," she said, giving him a brief, approving nod. Caleb grunted, allowing himself a small sense of satisfaction. They were holding their ground. The hovercraft moved closer, dropping a small reconnaissance unit near the edge of the property. Caleb and Lyra ducked low as it scanned the barn, its sensors glinting in the fading sunlight. Caleb's hand hovered near his rifle. Lyra tapped on her device, sending a pulse that scrambled the recon drone's cameras. Sparks flew, and the machine crashed into a puddle nearby. "Good thinking," Caleb said, impressed. "I didn't expect that to work." Lyra smiled briefly, but stayed focused. "We've got to keep moving. They'll adjust fast." The sun finally touched the horizon, turning the plains into a canvas of orange and purple. Caleb realized they couldn't stay static forever. They needed to draw the pursuers into a trap. Using the terrain to their advantage, Caleb led Lyra toward a narrow canyon on the edge of the ranch. The drones followed, some hovering above, others skimming the ground. Caleb had set small tripwires linked to explosive energy charges along the canyon floor. As the pursuers advanced, he signaled Lyra, who activated the charges remotely. A series of blinding flashes erupted, scattering the drones and forcing the hovercraft to retreat momentarily. They didn't have much time. The attackers would regroup. Caleb and Lyra ran along the canyon, their movements synchronized, each instinctively knowing the other's pace and strategy. For Caleb, it was a strange and thrilling feeling, to rely on someone else yet feel the teamwork flowing naturally. Lyra matched him step for step, her gadgets ready, her mind calculating the next move. Finally, they reached a natural overhang, giving them a temporary vantage point. From here, they could see the drones circling below, regrouping for another approach. Caleb set his rifle aside, leaning on the rock wall. Lyra joined him, scanning the area with her device. "You did good," she said quietly. "Better than I expected." "You're not bad yourself," he replied, smirking faintly. "I wasn't sure if I wanted company." "But you make it easier." Lyra looked at him, eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I'm glad I'm here." "And I think you might be too." Caleb didn't answer immediately. 20 years of solitude had taught him to be cautious with words, but there was no denying the truth in her statement. He had felt the spark of connection last night, and now, under the canyon's shadow, he could feel it growing. The pursuers moved again, but Caleb and Lyra were ready. Using the terrain and their combined knowledge, they forced the drones into narrow passes, where the canyon walls created natural choke points. Caleb used his rifle to disable key targets, while Lyra's gadgets disrupted communications and sensors. Each move was precise, careful, and deadly effective. By nightfall, the last of the drones had been driven off, at least for now. The hovercraft retreated beyond the ridge, disappearing into the distance. Caleb and Lyra stood together, breathing heavily, their bodies covered in mud and sweat, but their spirits high. "You're sure they're gone?" Lyra asked, still scanning the horizon. "For now," Caleb said, "but they'll be back. They always come back." Lyra nodded. "Then we prepare, together." For the first time in decades, Caleb felt the warmth of companionship, not just as a helper or partner in survival, but as someone who could share his life. They had faced danger side by side, trusted each other's skills, and survived. That trust was more valuable than any technology or skill they had. They returned to the ranch, reinforcing the barn and setting up additional defenses. Caleb found himself talking more freely than he had in years, sharing stories of past adventures, of storms and wild animals, and even the quiet beauty of solitude. Lyra listened intently, laughing at the lighter moments and offering advice during the technical fixes. As the fire crackled that night, Caleb realized something he hadn't expected. For the first time in 20 years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living. With Lyra beside him, the prairie no longer felt empty. Danger might still lurk beyond the horizon, but together they were stronger. The night grew quiet, the stars reflecting off the puddles left by the storm. Caleb and Lyra sat near the fire, sharing a simple meal, the kind that reminded them of the small comforts of home. Their conversation drifted naturally, moving from strategy to lighter topics, jokes, and stories from the frontier. Caleb realized that he had started to care, not just for survival but for her, for the bond that had formed between them. He had avoided attachments for 20 years, but Lyra had changed that. Not with force, but with her presence, her courage, and her unwavering determination. As they settled for the night, Caleb glanced out toward the prairie. The drones might return, the hovercraft might come back, and challenges would undoubtedly arise. But he didn't feel fear as he had before. He felt trust, and even something warmer, a flicker of hope. For 20 years, Caleb Ryder had lived alone. For one night he had shared danger with someone else, and he had discovered that survival was not just about keeping oneself alive. It was about trusting, relying, and maybe even caring for someone beyond oneself. And in the quiet of the Montana plains, under the glow of the energy shields and the watchful stars, Caleb knew that he was no longer entirely alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had survived. And that survival had forged something stronger than fear, something that could grow into a partnership, a bond, and perhaps a beginning. The morning sun rose slowly over the Montana plains, bathing the ranch in soft golden light. The air was crisp, and the remnants of the storm shimmered on the prairie grasses. Caleb Ryder stood outside the barn, Orion at his side, watching the horizon. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of calm. The drones and hovercraft of yesterday had retreated, and the prairie seemed almost peaceful again. Lyra joined him, her device scanning the area while she adjusted the sensors around the barn. "They won't be back for a while," she said, her voice steady but carrying a note of relief. "But we need to be ready. The frontier is never quiet for long." Caleb nodded. "And I don't intend to take chances, but right now, it's a good morning." They moved through the ranch together, checking fences, repairing broken solar panels, and tending to the robotic cattle. Their teamwork had become instinctive. Caleb handled the physical labor while Lyra optimized systems with her devices. The barn, once a simple wooden structure, now glowed with energy shields and holographic sensors, a perfect blend of frontier practicality and advanced technology. As they worked, they shared stories, laughter, and quiet observations. Caleb found himself opening up more than he had in years, speaking of his past losses, the years of solitude, and the small joys he had discovered in living alone. Lyra listened carefully, offering insights and small smiles of understanding. She shared stories of her own travels, the challenges of life on the frontier, and the clever ways she had survived. By midday, the ranch was running efficiently, and for a moment, the two of them paused to admire their work. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden under the sun, and for the first time, Caleb didn't feel the weight of isolation pressing down on him. He felt hope. "Caleb," Lyra said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I want to stay, here, with you. I've been on the move for so long, and I've never found a place that felt right, until now." Caleb paused, considering her words. 20 years of solitude had taught him caution, but also longing. The thought of having someone beside him, someone who shared his challenges and his victories, was both thrilling and frightening. He studied her eyes, searching for any trace of uncertainty, but there was none. "Only sincerity and determination. Then stay," he said finally, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're welcome here." Her face brightened and she nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. In that moment, the prairie seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging a new chapter in the life of the solitary cowboy. The following days were filled with both work and discovery. Caleb and Lyra reinforced the ranch's defenses, knowing that the hovercraft and drones might return. They trained together, combining Caleb's frontier skills with Lyra's technological expertise. Tripwires, sensors, and energy shields became second nature to them, and they moved as a single unit, ready for whatever threats might appear. But alongside the preparation, a deeper bond formed. Simple gestures, a shared meal, laughter over a small mistake, quiet conversations by the fire, built a foundation of trust and companionship. Caleb, who had avoided attachments for so long, felt the warmth of connection grow in ways he hadn't thought possible. Lyra, too, discovered that the rugged frontier life could be comforting when shared with someone who truly understood it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, they stood together at the edge of the prairie, watching the shadows lengthen. Orion grazed nearby, and the wind whispered through the grass. Lyra turned to Caleb. "You've changed, you know," she said softly, "since I arrived. You're lighter somehow, not just in spirit, but in the way you face life." Caleb chuckled quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just remembered what it's like to care about someone other than myself." She smiled. "And what does that feel like?" He looked out over the plains, feeling the wind on his face. "It feels like the prairie itself is welcoming me again." Their moment of peace was interrupted by a distant hum, a reminder that danger still existed. Caleb didn't flinch. He had faced the drones and hovercraft before, and with Lyra beside him, he felt confident in their ability to handle any challenge. "They won't find an easy target here," he said. "Not while we work together. And we'll keep learning, keep adapting. That's how we survive. That's how we thrive." The sun finally set, painting the prairie in shades of pink and violet. They returned to the barn where the fire crackled, casting warm light across the walls lined with equipment and tools. Caleb handed Lyra a cup of steaming tea, and they sat together, enjoying the simple comfort of the moment. "I never thought I'd find someone to share this life with," Caleb admitted. "I thought 20 years alone was enough, but now I can't imagine it without you."
Lyra reached out, placing her hand briefly on his.
"I feel the same. This place, this life, it's better because we face it together." For the first time in decades, Caleb felt no hesitation, no fear of attachment. He realized that companionship, trust, and shared challenges could make even the harshest frontier feel like home. The prairie, with its endless horizons and unpredictable weather, had given him solitude. But now it gave him possibility. Days turned into weeks. Caleb and Lyra worked together to improve the ranch further. They added more advanced sensors, reinforced the energy shields, and even started small gardens to supplement their food supplies. Each success, each completed task, strengthened their bond. The ranch was no longer just Caleb's domain. It was theirs, a shared space of survival, ingenuity, and hope. They also found time for moments of quiet reflection. Caleb taught Lyra how to ride Orion across the plains, sharing his knowledge of tracking and survival. Lyra showed Caleb how to use her devices for long-distance communication and surveillance skills he had never thought necessary in his isolated life. Each lesson was exchanged with patience, laughter, and mutual respect. One evening, as the first stars appeared in the sky, they sat on a ridge overlooking the prairie. Caleb looked at Lyra, her face illuminated by the soft glow of her devices. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd enjoy another person's company," he said quietly. Lyra laughed softly. "And yet, here we are. The frontier doesn't just test you, it teaches you. And sometimes it surprises you." Caleb smiled, feeling the weight of years lift from his shoulders. "I suppose it does. And maybe it gives second chances, too." She looked at him, eyes bright. "I believe it does, and we're living proof." As the night deepened, the prairie stretched endlessly around them, quiet and full of promise. They returned to the barn, their movements synchronized and natural. The fire was already crackling, warming the small space, while the energy shields hummed softly, guarding against any unforeseen threats. Caleb realized that for the first time in 20 years he felt truly at peace. The loneliness that had defined him was no longer a cage. It was a memory. With Lyra by his side, he could face the unknown, knowing that they were stronger together than apart. The hovercraft and drones might return, storms might rage, and challenges would continue to appear on the frontier, but Caleb no longer feared them alone. Together with Lyra, he had found trust, partnership, and the quiet beginnings of love. He glanced at her, a warm smile spreading across his face. "The prairie feels different now. Better. Alive." Lyra nodded, her hand brushing lightly against his. "Because we face it together." The night passed quietly, stars twinkling above, the prairie peaceful and infinite. Caleb and Lyra, side by side, had forged a bond that could withstand the uncertainties of the frontier. Their days of solitude were over, replaced by the shared life of two people who had discovered that companionship could make even the wildest frontier feel like home. By morning, the sun rose again over the Montana plains, golden and radiant. Caleb mounted Orion, Lyra beside him, ready to face the day, the prairie, and whatever challenges the frontier might throw their way. The ranch, once a lonely outpost, now buzzed with life and hope. For 20 years, Caleb Ryder had lived alone. For one stormy night, he had shared danger. And now, with Lyra beside him, he had discovered something he hadn't expected in decades: trust, companionship, and the quiet promise of a new beginning. Together they rode across the endless plains, the horizon stretching before them, a symbol of possibility and hope. The frontier remained unpredictable, wild, and beautiful, but Caleb no longer faced it alone, and in that moment he knew that sometimes life's greatest adventures began not with a journey into the unknown, but with opening your heart to someone unexpected.